The storm had broken over Tombstone, leaving streets slick with mud and shadows clinging to every wall. The saloon lamps flickered weakly, their glow unable to banish the dread pressing on the town. Samuel pushed through the doors, his boots heavy, his eyes haunted. He carried more than the storm's fury. He carried a truth no one wanted to hear. "Emily," said Samuel, "what happened to you?" Her voice trembled as she watched him stagger, crimson streaks staining his shirt. He whispered, "It's back. The past has come for us." The silence in the saloon deepened, every breath held tight. Jacob gripped his glass, his jaw tight. He muttered, "Don't speak nonsense, Samuel." Samuel collapsed against the table, gasping, "The dead don't rest here. And neither will we." A gunshot echoed outside, sharp as lightning, rattling windows and breaking the moment. Fear gripped them all. Emily's eyes darted to the door, her voice barely a whisper, "We're not alone anymore." The saloon's door creaked open again, but no one stood there, only the sound of boots fading into the night. The silence weighed heavier than the storm outside. Every patron in the saloon stared at Samuel's still form, afraid to move. Emily's hand lingered on the bar, her breath shallow, her heart pounding against her chest. Jacob said, "This town don't need ghost stories, it needs order." His tone was sharp, but his eyes betrayed doubt. Samuel groaned, lifting his head with effort, his voice hoarse. "It's not a story. It's a curse we buried, and it's awake again." A cold wind seeped through the cracked door, extinguishing one lamp, leaving half the room in darkness. Emily whispered, "I've heard tales since I was a child, but I never thought they were true." The saloon fell deeper into unease, every creak of the wood sounding like footsteps from beyond. Samuel struggled upright, his gaze locked on the door. "We can't run from it anymore," he said. The storm outside grew distant, yet the saloon felt suffocated by silence. Samuel steadied himself, his knuckles white as he clutched the table edge. Jacob barked, "You're delirious, bleeding out, seeing shadows where none exist." Emily shook her head, her voice soft but firm. "No, I felt it too. When the door opened, the room changed." Samuel's eyes burned with conviction. "It's the souls of Tombstone, chained by what we did years ago. They won't stop until the truth is unearthed." Jacob slammed his fist against the wood, making glasses rattle. "You'll get the town killed with talk like that." Emily's eyes brimmed with fear as she whispered, "Or save." The town and outside groaned under the weight of the night. Samuel struggled to his feet, staggering toward the window, his hand leaving a streak of blood on the glass. Emily hurried to his side, whispering, "You need a doctor, not ghosts." He turned slowly, voice strained. "No doctor can cure the dead's hunger." Jacob muttered curses under his breath but didn't move closer. Samuel lifted a trembling finger toward the street, his voice breaking. "They're already here." Emily's gaze followed his, and her lips parted in horror. Outside, faint shapes lingered in the mist, shadows stretching unnaturally, moving against the wind. The saloon erupted in murmurs as patrons rose, eyes wide, staring toward the window. Samuel gasped, his body trembling. "They're bound to the truth we buried." Emily clutched his arm tighter. "What truth?" she pleaded. His eyes glistened as he whispered, "The blood we spilled, the lies we lived. It's come to claim us." Jacob's voice cracked for the first time. "Then God help us all." A sudden scream tore through the night, echoing from the street, chilling every soul inside. The room froze, breaths held in terror, as the scream faded into silence. Morning broke over Tombstone, the streets still heavy with shadows of the night before. Samuel limped across the boardwalk, each step a reminder of his wounds. Emily stayed close, her voice urgent. "You can't keep pushing yourself." Samuel's eyes burned with resolve. "If I stop now, it will consume us all." Jacob followed silently, his jaw set, the tension between loyalty and fear visible in every glance. Townspeople peeked from behind shutters, whispering about the man who spoke of ghosts. An old bell tolled from the chapel, a sound more like a warning than a call. Emily tightened her shawl as wind swept dust across her path. She whispered, "They're watching us, even in daylight." Samuel stopped, staring at the courthouse looming ahead. "This town was built on lies," he said, his voice breaking, "and the dead won't let us forget." The courthouse towered over them, its wood worn but still carrying authority. Samuel paused at the steps, his hand brushing the rail as if memories were etched in the grain. Emily asked softly, "What do you see here?" His eyes hardened. "I see the day justice died." Jacob spat in the dust, muttering, "A building never held justice. Men did, and men failed us." A deputy emerged, rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes suspicious. He said, "You're stirring trouble again, Samuel." Samuel raised his chin. "Truth isn't trouble. It's the only way forward." The deputy sneered, but Emily's steady gaze forced him to falter. The air thickened, as though even the walls of the courthouse knew the weight of buried sins. The saloon by midday buzzed with unease. Patrons whispered as Samuel entered, his presence commanding silence. Emily followed, her eyes sweeping the room, noting every wary glance. Jacob muttered, "They don't want your truth, Samuel, they want peace." Samuel's voice cut through the murmur. "Peace built on lies rots faster than corpses in shallow graves." A young man at a corner table, William, shifted uneasily. He whispered, "I heard the cries last night too." The saloon erupted in nervous chatter. Emily placed her hand on Samuel's arm. "You've lit the spark. Now you must control the fire." The piano player's hands froze mid-song, the room's tension snapping like a rope pulled too tight. Later, Samuel sat outside the saloon, the wooden bench creaking under his weight. Emily knelt beside him, pressing cloth to his wounds. She whispered, "You can't fight shadows if you're broken." He winced but held her gaze. "Pain is nothing compared to silence." Jacob leaned against a post, his arms crossed. "You'll get her killed chasing this madness." Emily's eyes flared. "I choose where I stand, Jacob." The wind carried the distant echo of boots on cobblestone, but no one was there. Samuel turned toward the empty street, his jaw tight. "It's not madness," he murmured. "It's the reckoning." As dusk fell, the bell tolled again, each strike echoing across the town like a funeral dirge. Samuel stood in the square, facing townspeople who gathered reluctantly. Emily's voice rang steady. "You've all felt it, haven't you? The presence that lingers." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, faces pale with denial and fear. Jacob stepped forward, voice booming. "This man speaks of curses, but what we face is flesh and blood corruption." Samuel lifted his head, eyes blazing. "The corruption is only part of it. The dead want rest while truth lies buried." The townspeople shifted uneasily, torn between belief and dismissal. A chill breeze swept through the square, scattering dust and silence. Night folded over Tombstone like a shroud, as lanterns bobbed along Boot Hill's path. Samuel led the way, jaw set, boots crunching dry gravel. Emily said, "Every step feels watched." Her voice thinned against the wind. Jacob kept to the rear, eyes combing the graves. William pointed to a broken marker and whispered, "This fell since morning." The earth breathed cold, and the grass hissed with unseen feet. Samuel said, "Listen." From the gulch rose a moan like iron dragged on stone. The bell in town tolled once, though no hand pulled its rope. Emily gripped the lantern tighter and said, "They want us to see." Jacob muttered, "Or to run." A pale shape rippled between headstones, there and gone. Samuel said, "No running." He knelt by a sunken grave and brushed dirt aside. A rotted board showed a carved star scorched black. He said, "This is the mark that started it." They returned to the street and found the law waiting in a row of polished boots. Marshal Crane stood centered, face clean, smile dull as a knife. He said, "You're trespassing where the town forbids." Samuel held his stare. "The dead refuse your rules." Murmurs spread as doors cracked open. Emily said, "People are scared, Marshal." He tipped his hat. Fear keeps order. Jacob's fists closed, knuckles white. William shifted behind Samuel, eyes lowered. Crane's deputies fanned wide, rifles easy in their hands. Crane said, "Leave the graves to silence, and I'll leave you to your lives." Samuel's voice was steady. "Silence is what buried them." The wind rose, spinning dust around their boots like a warning spiral. By noon the next day, the courthouse cellar breathed damp and secrets. Samuel pried at a warped hatch as Emily read names from stained ledgers. She said, "Payments, dates, crosses in the margins." Jacob said, "That's a code, not a prayer." William found a crate marked with the star they saw. He said, "Same brand as the grave." Samuel lifted the lid and froze. Inside lay badges darkened by fire and a map charred at its edges. He said, "They burned the names and kept the ground." Footsteps thudded above, then silence. Emily whispered, "We're not alone." Jacob blew out the lantern, and darkness pooled like ink. Old breath slid past their cheeks. Samuel said, "Show us what you want us to face." The papers fluttered without hands, and the map turned to the gulch. They met Thomas behind the livery, a man with sand in his hair and history in his eyes. He said, "You're stirring graves that never slept." Samuel answered, "Then guide us right." Thomas unrolled a brittle sketch of Tombstone before the mines cut it raw. He tapped the gulch and said, "There was a roundup here. Men vanished, records were scrubbed." Emily breathed. "Who ordered it?" Thomas looked toward the courthouse clock. "The same hands that tolled that bell." Jacob said, "Crane." Thomas nodded once. William's voice shook. "So the dead want their names spoken." The wind carried the bell's thin ring, though the hour had passed. Thomas said, "Names, and the truth of the ground that swallowed them." Dusk bled into violet as they reached the gulch rim. The ground hummed with a low, metallic throb. Samuel said, "This is where the town began to lie." Emily lifted her lantern and said, "And where it ends if we fail." Jacob set his boots firm, eyes narrowed at the ravine. William knelt, brushing dust from a line of buried stakes. He said, "Markers, cut short." The air cooled fast, breath turning to veils. A figure formed from the fog, hat brim low, chest torn by an old wound. Samuel stepped forward and said, "We hear you." The figure raised a hand and pointed toward town. The bell tolled thrice, though no rope moved. The earth trembled, and the gulch whispered, "Name us." The crowd in the square swelled as the bell tolled again, its echo sharp against the evening sky. Marshal Crane stood on the platform, his polished boots gleaming. He said, "This town belongs to the living, not the whispers of graves." Samuel pushed forward, his voice strong despite his wounds. "The dead will not rest until the truth is named." Emily's eyes scanned the faces of townsfolk, some fearful, others silently begging for answers. Jacob muttered, "They'll turn on us if you push too far." But William shouted, "I heard them too." A hush followed, broken only by Crane's cold laugh. He said, "Fear makes fools of men. Step back or you'll be buried with your ghosts." The tension snapped like a drawn rope, and the square bristled with dread. The saloon filled with murmurs that night, townsfolk whispering about curses and justice. Samuel sat at a table, maps and scorched papers spread before him. Emily said, "They don't want ghosts, they want hope." He met her gaze. "Hope lives in truth." Jacob slammed his palm down, rattling glasses. "Hope dies when fear rules." William leaned forward whispering, "They'll follow you if you show them proof." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Then proof is what they'll have." The lantern flickered, shadows lengthening across the walls. A chill swept the room though the doors were closed. Emily whispered, "They're listening even here." By dawn, Samuel led Emily, Jacob, and William back to the gulch. The ground trembled faintly, as if alive. Emily whispered, "It knows we're here." Jacob muttered, or Crane sent men ahead. Samuel knelt by the old stakes, brushing dirt from a broken badge. He said, "These men weren't buried. They were hidden." William's face paled as he pointed to fresh boot prints in the dust. "Someone else came before us." A crow cawed overhead, its wings black against the rising sun. Samuel's voice hardened. "Then they know what we know. And they'll kill to keep it buried." The gulch sighed with wind that sounded too much like voices. That night, Samuel and his companions confronted Crane in his office. Papers littered the desk, maps of Tombstone marked with red ink. Samuel threw the scorched badge down, the sound sharp as iron. He said, "You buried more than men. You buried the law itself." Crane leaned back, a smile without warmth. "The town needed order, and order demands sacrifice." Emily's voice cut like glass. "You sacrificed lives for power." Jacob growled. "And you thought no one would ever dig it up." Crane's eyes flickered with cold amusement. "You can't fight the past. It's mine now." Samuel leaned in, voice low. "The past fights for itself." The church bell rang at midnight, though no hand pulled it, each toll rattling the windows of Tombstone. The townspeople gathered in fear, staring at the dark sky. Samuel stood among them, his voice raised. "The dead demand justice. Crane hides behind power, but truth will break his grip." Emily stepped beside him, her voice steady. "We've seen the proof, and so have you." Jacob shouted, "Will you stand with him or with the truth?" Murmurs rippled, fear shifting into resolve. Marshal Crane emerged, pistol at his side, his smile thin. He said, "Then let the town choose tonight." Thunder rolled, and the dead whispered in the wind. Dawn broke brittle and thin over Tombstone, the light feeling borrowed rather than earned. Samuel stood at the gulch with the charred map unrolled like a wound. Emily said, "If we say the names, will the town stand with us?" He watched dust curl off the rim and answered, "They'll stand or they'll hide, but the ground will speak." Jacob scanned the ridge, jaw tight, and said, "Crane won't wait for votes." William pointed toward Boot Hill. The bell tolled before sunrise. A shape gathered from fog, the same torn vest, the same silent stare. Emily whispered, "Give us the truth." The wind dropped, and a copper glint rolled to Samuel's boot. He bent and lifted a signet ring, etched with a hawk. Emily's breath caught. "I've seen that crest in an old locket," Samuel said. Then the dead chose who must carry the flame. They gathered in the chapel, its windows clouded by years of ashen breath. Thomas laid out brittle records, pages that crumbled at touch. He said before Crane, a different badge ruled. Samuel traced a name burned halfway away. Elias Hart. Emily stared at a sketch pinned to the margin and said, "The same hawk crest." Thomas nodded, voice low. He tried to expose the roundup. He vanished in the gulch. Jacob said, "Crane didn't start the lie. He finished it." William swallowed hard. "Then who pulled the first rope?" The bell rope quivered without a hand. Emily closed her eyes and said, "Elias Hart stands in fog because Tombstone forgot him." Samuel answered, "Not after today." By noon the square filled with boots and breath, the air buzzing like a wire. Marshal Crane stepped onto the platform with polished calm. He said, "End this fever." Samuel lifted the records high. Elias Hart tried to end it first. Murmurs rolled like surf. Emily said, "The hawk crest marks the witness you burned." Jacob held up the scorched badge. "Your office hid the trail, but the ground remembered." Crane smiled thinly. "Tales for frightened crowds." "What?" William's voice cracked. "The bell tolls for names." The wind slipped quiet, and a single word rose from the gulch like smoke. Samuel spoke it aloud, steady and clear. "Elias." Doors opened. Faces changed. Silence leaned toward truth. Crane's smile faltered when Thomas stepped forward with a ledger bound in wire. Thomas said, "I signed this under a different badge." The page showed payouts matched to vanished names. Samuel said, "Who ordered the roundup?" Thomas stared at the courthouse clock and answered. Elias Hart refused. He was taken under the old mayor's seal. Emily whispered. Then Crane inherited the mask, not the wound. Jacob faced Crane. You profited from a grave you did not dig. Crane drew a breath that sounded like steel. Order is not gentle. William shook his head. Order isn't murder. Thunder crawled along the hills, as if the sky weighed the words. Samuel said, Bring the mayor's seal to light. They returned to the gulch as dusk bled purple across the mesa. Samuel placed the ledger and badge on a flat stone. He said, Elias Hart. Emily set the ring beside them and said, We see you. Jacob added the charred map, palm steady. William spoke the vanished names one by one from the ledger's edge. The fog stirred and pulled into the shape with the torn vest. A brim lifted, and a scar caught the last light. Elias turned and pointed toward town, then to the courthouse clock. Samuel said, You want the seal broken before the bell. Wind rushed the ravine like breath. Emily nodded. We'll break it. The bell tolled once, approving, then held its peace. The courthouse square seethed as night fell, torches flickering against the wood and stone. Samuel stood tall before the steps, his voice clear. The seal that bound Elias Hart will break tonight. Emily gripped his arm, whispering, The people are watching. Jacob scanned the rooftops and muttered, Crane has men waiting. William's eyes darted nervously through the crowd. Marshal Crane stepped forward, pistol gleaming at his side. He said, This town belongs to me, not to the dead. Thunder cracked above, drowning gasps. Samuel raised the ledger and badge, his words cutting through the storm. It belongs to truth, and truth is coming for you. Rain began to fall, hissing against wood as the townspeople backed away from the platform. Crane raised his pistol and barked, Step down or be buried beside Hart. Samuel's voice carried steady. Elias stood for justice, and so will I. Emily shouted, He's the reason the bell won't rest. Jacob pulled his revolver, eyes sharp. William whispered, They're coming. From the mist beyond the square, ghostly figures formed, their outlines ragged and glowing pale. Murmurs turned to cries as townsfolk fled. Crane snarled, Tricks and shadows won't save you. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the spirits behind Samuel, silent witnesses demanding justice. Gunfire cracked through the storm, bullets sparking off stone. Samuel dove behind a trough, firing back with steady hands. Emily dragged William to cover, whispering, Stay low. Jacob shouted, They've got the high ground. Deputies lined the rooftops, rifles spitting flame into the rain. Crane's voice boomed above it all. The living answer to me. Samuel rose from cover, shouting, Not anymore. The bell swung on its own, ringing thunder over the gunfight. Shadows of the dead surged closer, their presence chilling the air. Emily's voice rang out, They stand with us. The townspeople who remained drew courage from the vision, rallying against Crane's men. The gunfire slowed as thunder rolled, and the spirits pressed closer. One by one, Crane's deputies faltered, their rifles dropping as the cold breath of the dead swept through them. Samuel advanced through the storm, each step heavy but resolute. Emily followed, lantern light trembling but unbroken. Jacob covered their flank, revolver smoking. William clutched the ledger to his chest, whispering the names aloud. The bell rang with each name, louder, deeper, shaking the square. Crane shouted, You think dead men can rule me? Samuel leveled his revolver, voice sharp as steel. No, but they'll end you. The storm reached its peak as Samuel and Crane faced each other at the courthouse steps. Crane raised his pistol, his hand shaking. You'll destroy this town, he snarled. Samuel's eyes burned. The truth will save it. Emily whispered, End this. Jacob growled, Do it now. William's trembling voice called the final name from the ledger. The bell tolled once, deep and final, rattling every window in Tombstone. Lightning struck the courthouse roof, splitting timber. Crane fired, but the shot went wide. Samuel's revolver roared, striking true. Crane staggered, his pistol falling. The spirits surged forward, surrounding him, their whispers dragging him into the storm. Silence followed, broken only by the fading echo of the bell. Dawn came soft over Tombstone, as if the storm had rinsed the town clean. Samuel stood at the courthouse steps, where smoke still curled from split timber. Emily said, "It's quieter, like the ground is breathing again." Jacob tested the bell rope and said, "It rings only when we pull it." William held the ledger close and whispered, "The names feel lighter." Thomas approached with careful steps and said, "You gave them back their place in the world." Samuel looked to the gulch rim and said, "They gave us the courage to try." A breeze lifted ash into harmless gray feathers. Emily said, "Let them rest, and let the living learn." The square listened without fear. The chapel filled with voices that did not tremble. Emily read the names while Jacob placed the scorched badge on the altar. William said, "Elias Hart led the way." Thomas nodded and said, "A lawman once, and a witness always." Samuel bowed his head and said, "We stand because he would not kneel." Sunlight broke through glass and painted the pews with honeyed lines. The bell remained still, yet peace moved through the room. Emily said, "No more hiding behind order without justice." Jacob added, "No more graves without names." The town answered with a quiet amen. At Boot Hill, the wind moved like a lullaby, not a warning. Samuel set new markers where stakes once broke. Emily said, "They will be remembered by the living who pass here." William pressed fresh letters into soft wood and said, "Elias Ha." Jacob kept guard with eyes on the ridge, more habit than fear. Thomas pointed to an open patch and said, "Leave ground for the stories yet to come." Samuel said, "Let them be written right." The sky brightened as if the dead approved. Emily smiled and said, "Tombstone can be honest now." The hill was quiet and kind. By afternoon the square looked different, because people stood differently. Merchants opened shutters without glancing over their shoulders. Samuel said, "We rebuild the roof and the oath." Emily placed the ring with the hawk crest in a glass case and said, "Let it speak for Elias Hart." Jacob grinned at last and said, "I prefer a bell that minds its keeper." William laughed, the sound new and bright. Thomas said, "Truth is a hard sheriff, but a fair one." Samuel looked at the horizon and said, "Well, keep watch without fear." The town answered with honest work. Twilight laid a silver edge on the rooftops as they gathered at the gulch one last time. Fog rose gentle and parted around a figure in a torn vest. Elias Hart lifted his head and set 2 fingers to the brim. Samuel said, "You have your names back." Emily said, "And we have our town." Jacob added, "Rest easy, lawman." William whispered, "Thank you." Thomas murmured, "The past can walk on, if truth walks with it." The figure turned to the horizon and thinned to light. The bell was still. Samuel said, "Sometimes the land don't forgive, but it remembers who tried."